300, he spat, slamming the crumpled bills on the counter. Eliza's hand hovered above them. Not enough. Not even close. Rage, hot and sharp, threatened to spill. Her mama needed that experimental treatment. Now. It's all I got, the man whined, eyes darting to the exit. But Eliza saw the glint of gold beneath his sleeve. A ring, familiar. Just like... The realization hit like a punch. She knew that ring, her mama's ring. Except it was nestled on his finger. This wasn't chance, this was deliberate. An old debt, a stolen promise. They think they're untouchable. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. 300, he spat, slamming the crumpled bills on the counter. Eliza's hand hovered above them. Not enough. Not even close. Rage, hot and sharp, threatened to spill. Her mama needed that experimental treatment. Now. It's all I got, the man whined, eyes darting to the exit. But Eliza saw the glint of gold beneath his sleeve. A ring. Familiar. Just like... The realization hit like a punch. She knew that ring. Her mama's ring. Except it was nestled on his finger. This wasn't chance. This was deliberate. An old debt. A stolen promise. They think they're untouchable. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. The bell above the diner door announced the arrival of a man who moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. He didn't slam the door with indifference or make any loud statements. He just entered with a kind of quiet command that caused a noticeable ripple of hushed voices around him. He was sculpted in wealth, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, the subtle sheen of his Italian leather shoes catching the dim light, and his aura screamed expensive. Eliza, scrubbing down the counter for what felt like the millionth time that night, sighed inwardly. Another late-night customer. Her feet ached, her head throbbed, and the ever-present worry about her mama gnawed at her insides. Every muscle in her body yearned for the sweet embrace of her bed, but she plastered on a weary smile and grabbed a menu. He slid into a corner booth, his movements fluid and economical, and she approached, the linoleum sticky beneath her worn-out sneakers. "Evening, sir. Anything I can get you started with?" He didn't even glance at the menu. His ice-blue eyes flicked over her, a brief assessing glance that made her feel like an exhibit under a microscope, then landed on some distant point beyond the greasy windows. "Black coffee, that's all." His voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the diner, silencing even the sizzle of the nearby grill. "Coming right up," she said, retreating to the coffee machine. Chloe, her friend and coworker, sidled up beside her, eyes wide. "Did you see him? Mr. Moneybags himself. I bet you that's Gideon Pierce, the guy who owns half the buildings downtown." Eliza frowned, pouring the dark liquid into a chipped mug. "Who?" "Gideon Pierce. Pierce Holdings. The ruthless billionaire. They say he's made billions before he was 30. The kind of guy who probably eats lobster for breakfast and steps over homeless people to get to work." Eliza glanced back at the booth. He was staring out the window, his profile sharp and unforgiving in the neon glow. He looked more like a predator surveying his territory than a businessman relaxing after a long day. She picked up the mug, careful not to spill. "Well, to me, he's just another customer who wants black coffee." She walked back to the booth and set the mug down in front of him. As he reached for it, his cufflink peeked from his sleeve, and something caught her eye. Something impossible. There, nestled against the pale skin of his ring finger, was a ring. Not just any ring, a heavy gold signet ring, crafted in an intricate design she knew intimately. A phoenix, its wings outstretched in eternal flight, and in its eye, a single, impossibly blue sapphire gleamed like a captured star. The band was unique, carved with a pattern of intertwined feathers. Eliza's breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She'd seen that ring 1,000 times, not gleaming under diner lights, but resting in the velvet-lined box on her mama's bedside table. Laura's ring, her most prized possession. Her father had given it to her on his deathbed, she'd always said, and it was more than just jewelry. It was something more. "It's a promise, Eliza." Her mother's voice, thin and raspy from the sickness, echoed in her mind. A promise of what's right. The words spilled out of Eliza's mouth before she could stop them, a soft, stunned whisper. "Excuse me, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours." Gideon Pierce's hand froze, hovering inches above the coffee cup. He slowly lowered it, his ice blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The dismissive air was gone, replaced by a sudden glacial focus. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared, his gaze dissecting her, searching for something she couldn't comprehend. "Excuse me?" he finally said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. Chloe's worried gaze burned into her back from across the diner. She should have kept her mouth shut, just walked away. But the image of her mama's frail hand clutching that ring was seared into her mind. "The ring," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "On your hand. It's the same as my mother's. The phoenix, the little sapphire. Everything." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Not surprise, not recognition, but something harder, darker. He slowly turned his hand over, examining the ring as if seeing it for the first time. "That's impossible," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "But it's not," Eliza insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "She's had it her whole life. Her grandfather gave it to her. He told her it was one of a kind." Gideon Pierce placed his hand flat on the table, the ring a silent, golden accusation. His gaze was cold steel. "This ring," he said, enunciating each word with chilling precision, "has been in the Pierce family for over 100 years. It was custom made for my great-grandfather, Alaric Pierce. There is no other. There has never been another. You are mistaken." The finality in his tone felt like a slap. He was calling her a liar, or worse, a fool. The injustice of it piled on top of her exhaustion, and fear for her mama ignited a spark of defiance. "I'm not mistaken," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've held it in my hands 1,000 times. I know every detail. I could draw it from memory." He leaned back, a faint, condescending smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "A fascinating story. What is your name?" "Eliza. Eliza Hole." "Well, Miss Hole," he said, picking up his coffee cup and taking a slow, deliberate sip, "your mother is either a liar or a thief, because the only way she has a ring like this is if it's the one that was stolen from my family 50 years ago." He set the cup down with a soft click. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of Eliza's world. Stolen. The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Her mama, the gentlest, most honest person she knew, a thief. The accusation was so absurd, so vile, it was like being told the sun rose in the west. Gideon Pierce reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and extracted 3 crisp $100 bills, placing them on the table. More than she made in 2 shifts. An insult. "For the coffee and your time," he said, his eyes already looking past her toward the door. He stood up, the power of his presence filling the small booth. He was already moving on, leaving her in the wreckage of his words. As he walked toward the exit, Eliza found her voice. "She's not a thief." He paused at the door, his back to her. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried clearly across the quiet diner. "Then prove it." The bell chimed again, and he was gone, leaving Eliza standing in the middle of the diner, her heart pounding, the hum of the lights now sounding like a scream. The 3 crisp bills on the table felt like blood money. She hadn't just served coffee to a billionaire. She had stumbled into his story, and in doing so she realized with a cold dread, she may have just destroyed her own. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and the anxious thumping of her own heart. Gideon Pierce's words echoed in her head. A liar or a thief? Preposterous. Laura Hole was a woman who would walk back into a store to return a few cents of extra change. The accusation was a poisoned dart, and Eliza felt its venom spreading through her veins. She found her mother sleeping, her face pale and sunken against the pristine white of the hospital pillow. The ever-present beep of the cardiac monitor was a fragile, rhythmic reassurance. On the small bedside table, next to a glass of water and a well-worn book of poetry, sat the small, dark blue velvet box. With trembling hands, Eliza picked it up. The velvet was worn smooth in places. She opened the lid. There it was, the pale gold ring catching the low light from the hallway, the phoenix with its proud, spread wings, and the eye, a tiny sapphire that seemed to hold a universe of secrets. It was identical. No question. "Eliza, honey, is that you?" Laura's voice was weak, raspy. Eliza quickly shut the box and turned, forcing a smile. "Hey, Mom, I didn't mean to wake you. Your late shift ran late." Laura's eyes, though clouded with illness, were still sharp, still full of the fierce love that had been Eliza's anchor her entire life. "The usual?" Eliza couldn't bring herself to tell the truth. How could she voice such a monstrous accusation to this frail woman? "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over by a very slow, very expensive truck," Laura said with a weak smile. "The doctors were in. More talk of options. It all sounds the same." She shifted in the bed, wincing, and her eyes fell on the box in Eliza's hand. Her expression changed. The weariness was replaced by a familiar, guarded look. "You were looking at the ring." Eliza hesitated. "I was just thinking about it. About Dad." Laura's hand, thin and crisscrossed with blue veins, reached out and she patted the mattress beside her. Eliza sat down. "Your grandfather," Laura corrected gently, as she always did. "It was my father who gave it to me, not yours." Eliza's father had been a good man, a mechanic who died in a workshop accident when she was 10, leaving behind nothing but debts and happy memories. The ring predated him. "Right, Granddad," Eliza said, her mind racing. "Mom, tell me about him again." "About the ring?" Laura's gaze drifted to the window, to the dark sky outside. "There's not much to tell that you haven't heard. My father, Owen, was a quiet man, a brilliant man, an engineer. He worked for a big corporation back east. He said the ring was payment for a promise that was broken by powerful men." "What kind of promise?" Eliza pressed, trying to keep her voice casual. "He never said, only that it was about recognizing what was right. He made me swear to never sell it, to keep it safe. He said, one day it might be the only proof we have." "Proof of what?" A flicker of fear, real and raw, crossed Laura's face. She looked at Eliza, her eyes pleading. "Leave it be, Eliza. It's an old story, a sad story. It has nothing to do with us anymore. Some doors are best left closed." "But Mom, what if someone else has a reason to open that door?" The words were out before she could stop them. Laura's grip on her hand tightened. "What do you mean? What happened?" Eliza saw the spike on the heart monitor and cursed herself. "Nothing. It's nothing. Just a stupid thing at work." She couldn't burden her mother with this. Not now. She needed to protect her. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A promise that was broken by powerful men. Who were they? And what did any of it have to do with Gideon Pierce? She returned to the hospital the next day with a new sense of urgency. She found Laura sitting up, looking a little stronger than the day before. The poetry book was open on her lap. "Mom," Eliza began pulling a chair close. "We need to talk for real this time. No more secrets." Laura sighed a long, weary sound and closed the book. "I knew this day would come. Seeing you with the box, I knew you wouldn't let it go." She looked at her daughter, her eyes full of a deep, ancient sorrow. "What did he say to you?" "He?" Eliza asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play coy, Eliza," the man from the diner. "You think a man like Gideon Pierce makes a scene and it doesn't get noticed. Chloe called me." She was worried sick. Eliza's shoulders slumped. "He found me. He knows about Granddad Owen. He thinks we're trying to blackmail him. He thinks Granddad sold his invention to the Pierce family." Laura's expression hardened. "Sold it? Is that what they call it?" She scoffed, a bitter rattling sound. "Your grandfather was a genius, Eliza, a gentle, trusting soul who thought the world worked on merit and good faith. He was working at a large firm, a competitor to Pierce Industries at the time. He developed his turbine gearing system on his own time. It was his masterpiece." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in the memory. He made the mistake of mentioning it to a colleague trusting him. That colleague left the company 2 months later for a senior position at Pierce Industries. 6 months after that, your grandfather received a visit from two men. They weren't lawyers. They were persuaders. They worked for William Pierce. The sterile hospital room suddenly felt cold. "What did they do?" Eliza whispered. "They didn't lay a hand on him," Laura said, her voice dropping. "They were smarter than that. They laid out photographs on our kitchen table. Pictures of me playing in the schoolyard. Pictures of your grandmother leaving the grocery store. They told him what a beautiful family he had, and they told him it would be a shame if something were to happen to them. Then they put a stack of papers in front of him, a non-disclosure agreement and a contract assigning all rights to his invention to a shell corporation owned by Pierce Industries, and an envelope full of cash. The story was uglier than Eliza could have imagined. This wasn't business. It was gangster tactics. He signed everything," Laura continued, her voice trembling. "What choice did he have? He took the money because refusing it would have been an act of defiance, and he was too scared to defy them. We moved a week later. He was a broken man, Eliza. They didn't just steal his work. They stole his soul. He died 6 years later. But the truth is, they killed him that day in our kitchen." Tears streamed down Eliza's face. She finally understood the deep well of sadness in her mother, the fear behind her warnings. "But the ring, Mom," Eliza pressed gently. "Where does the ring come into it? Who is Daniel Pierce?" Laura flinched at the name, a genuine, startled reaction. "Where did you hear that name?" Gideon told me. "He said his great-grandfather had 2 rings made, one for himself and one for his brother Daniel, who was disowned." Laura was silent for a full minute, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Daniel Owen never said the name Pierce. He only ever called him my friend, his only friend in that terrible time." She began to recount a different part of the story, one she'd never shared. After Owen was forced out, he fell into a deep depression. But one man sought him out, a man who introduced himself only as Daniel. He was a drifter, an outcast, but he had an artist's soul and a hatred for the kind of corporate greed that had destroyed Owen. He had heard what happened to Owen through the engineering grapevine. This Daniel, Laura recounted, told your grandfather that he too had been betrayed by a powerful family. He understood what it was to have everything stolen by your own blood. They became friends, 2 broken men finding solace in each other's company. Before Daniel left town for good, he gave Owen the ring. She looked at Eliza, her eyes intense. He told Owen this was meant to symbolize a shared dream between brothers. It was forged in hope and tainted by greed. It belongs to the wronged, not the wrongdoer. Keep it as proof that integrity has a value that money can't buy. One day the phoenix will rise for the right person. Owen cherished that ring more than the invention itself. It was a symbol that he wasn't alone in his suffering. So Daniel Pierce wasn't a traitor. He was another victim. And he had given the ring his own birthright to another wronged man as an act of solidarity. The story was so much more profound, so much more tragic than Gideon's cold family ledger. At the same time, Gideon was in his family's ancestral home, a sprawling stone estate an hour outside the city. He rarely came here. It felt more like a museum than a home filled with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. In the library, a room paneled in dark wood that smelled of old paper and polish, he met his cousin, Robert Pierce. Robert was a few years older with a practiced smile and the easy charm of a man who had never worked a day in his life. He managed the family's charitable foundation, a role that required him to attend galas and cut ribbons. "Gideon, to what do we owe the honor?" Robert said, pouring 2 glasses of brandy, tired of the concrete jungle. "I'm looking for information." "Robert," Gideon said, cutting to the chase about great-uncle Daniel. Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Daniel, the black sheep. That old ghost story. What's gotten into you?" "I have reason to believe the story is true, and I need to know the details. The real details, not the sanitized version." Robert swirled the brandy in his snifter, suddenly looking thoughtful. "Well, you know the legend. He was the younger brother, the artist, the dreamer. All Alaric was the pragmatist, the builder. Daniel apparently accused Alaric of stealing his ideas for the company's early successes. tried to stage a boardroom coup. When it failed, he vanished, but not before stealing a valuable ring and supposedly selling company secrets to a rival. Robert sighed dramatically. A classic tale of sibling rivalry and betrayal. It's why the line of succession has always been so rigidly defined, to prevent another Daniel. This was the story Gideon had always known. But hearing it now, it felt thin, theatrical. A convenient narrative to justify Alaric's consolidation of power. "And you believe that?" Gideon asked. "Why shouldn't I?" "It's our history," Robert said with a shrug. "It's a bit dramatic, sure, but it explains why the family closed ranks, why Grandpa William was so aggressive in his business dealings. He was protecting the family legacy from vultures from another betrayal." He leaned forward, his voice conspiratorial. Why the sudden interest? Did one of his descendants crawl out of the woodwork looking for a handout? The question was casual, but the look in Robert's eyes was sharp, probing. Gideon felt a sudden instinctual distrust. Robert had always seemed vapid, but perhaps that was a carefully constructed facade. "It's a private matter," Gideon said, his voice clipped. Of course," Robert said, leaning back, the charming smile returning. "Well, if you want to dig up old bones, be my guest. The old family papers are in the West Wing study, Gramps Williams' private correspondence. Knock yourself out. Just don't be surprised if the ghost you find is uglier than you imagined." Gideon left Robert with his brandy and went to the study. The room was dusty, unused for years. He found the boxes of letters tied with faded ribbon. For hours he sorted through them, reading his grandfather's elegant, cursive script. Most of it was business. But then he found a series of letters from the late 1960s addressed to his grandfather's head of security. The content made him feel ill. There were updates on the surveillance of a man named Owen Calloway, reports on his daughter's school schedule, his wife's daily routine, and then a final chilling memo. "Subject Calloway has been neutralized, assets secured. He is no longer a threat. Neutralized. Assets secured." Eliza Hole's story was true. It was all true. His family's fortune was built on theft and cemented with threats. The weight of the discovery was crushing. But as he continued to sift through the papers, he found something else. Something that didn't fit either his story or Eliza's. It was a single folded note separate from the letters tucked into the back of a ledger. It was in his grandfather William's handwriting, but it was frantic, almost illegible. "He knows I found him. He can ruin everything. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name." The note was undated. Who was he? And who was our Robert? It seemed too convenient. And what did it mean? Daniel is the key. Daniel was supposed to be a ghost, a long-vanished traitor. But this note, written decades after Daniel's disappearance, spoke of him as a present active threat. Gideon stood in the dusty, silent study, holding two conflicting testaments. In one hand, the sordid truth of his grandfather's crime against Owen Calloway. In the other, a cryptic note that suggested a deeper, more complex conspiracy was at play. The story was no longer just about his grandfather and Eliza's. There was a third player, a hidden thread, and the name of that thread was Daniel. The discovery of his grandfather's note threw Gideon into a state of focused obsession. He knows RH found him. Daniel is the key. It was a cipher, and Gideon knew he couldn't crack it alone. The animosity between him and Eliza had melted away, replaced by the grim reality that they were the only two people with a stake in the complete truth. He found her where he knew she'd be, in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of coffee with the same haunted expression he saw in the mirror. He sat down opposite her, placing a thin file on the table between them. "Your mother was right," he said, his voice devoid of its usual authority, filled instead with a quiet gravity about everything, the threats, the coercion. "My grandfather put your family through hell." He pushed the file forward. It contained the copies of the surveillance reports on the Calloway family. "This is the proof." Eliza opened the file, her hands trembling as she read the cold clinical descriptions of her mother as a little girl being watched. Her face palled. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of vindication and horror. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because my story is falling apart, and so is yours," Gideon said. "There's more to it." He told her about the note. "Daniel is the key. It was written by my grandfather William, Long after your grandfather was silenced, he was scared of someone who knew the truth about Daniel. Eliza frowned. But Daniel gave my grandfather the ring. He was an outcast, a victim like Owen. That's what he told your grandfather, Gideon countered. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if Daniel's disappearance wasn't just about him being cast out? We have two stories, yours and mine, but they're both based on what we were told by people who were themselves betrayed or lying. We need a primary source, an objective truth. Where do we find that? Eliza asked, the weight of a multi-generational conspiracy settling on her shoulders. The rings, Gideon said, a spark of inspiration in his eyes. They're the one constant. They're the origin point. My great-grandfather Alaric commissioned them from a Parisian artisan, Michel Dubois. The business is gone, but I found the firm that acquired its assets and, more importantly, its records, the ledgers in Paris. Eliza's heart sank. That was a world away. I had the relevant pages scanned and sent over this morning, Gideon said, tapping his phone. The high-resolution images are waiting in my office. I need another set of eyes. Your eyes. You know your ring better than anyone. An hour later, Eliza found herself in a place she could never have imagined. Gideon Pierce's office on the 80th floor. The silence was absolute. The view of the city breathtaking. On a massive screen that covered one wall was a high-resolution image of a page from an old leather-bound ledger. The script was elegant, spidery French. A translated transcript scrolled beside it. They pored over the entry for all Alaric Pierce's 1922 commission. As Genevieve had discovered, it listed two identical rings. But as they zoomed in on the artisan's original French notes, Eliza saw something the translator had missed. The translator's note read, one for the builder, one for the dreamer. But the original French was more specific. Eliza had taken 4 years of French in high school, and while she was rusty, one phrase jumped out at her. Guardian. That's not dreamer, Eliza said slowly, pointing at the screen. Guardian Deem. It means guardian of the soul. Gideon zoomed in, reading the phrase, guardian of the soul. He repeated the words, feeling heavy and significant. A builder of an empire and a guardian of its soul. It wasn't a rivalry. It was meant to be a partnership, a balance. This changed everything. All Alaric and Daniel weren't meant to be competitors. They were meant to be two halves of a whole. The story of Daniel's betrayal was a complete fabrication. As they scanned further down the page, Gideon noticed a small annotation next to the entry, added in a different hand and with different ink. It was dated 1945. What's this? He murmured, enlarging the note. The French was spidery and difficult to read. Reçu Daniel Pierce. The note began. Received a letter from Mr. Daniel Pierce. Gideon translated haltingly. He asked for a modification to the second ring to the inside of the band. He is no longer a Pierce. He is something else. Gideon and Eliza exchanged a look. No longer a Pierce, Eliza whispered. He changed his name, Gideon realized. When he was cast out, he abandoned the family name entirely. The note continued, Irel Owen. He asked me to inscribe a name. Gideon read his voice, catching the name Owen. Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Owen, my grandfather's name. But this was in 1945. My grandfather wouldn't have met Daniel for another 20 years. It's not your grandfather's name, Gideon said, a sudden shocking realization dawning on him. He typed furiously on his keyboard, pulling up his family's genealogy records, going back further than he ever had before. His fingers flew, his mind racing. He found his great-grandfather, all Alaric Pierce, then his great-grandmother, Beatrice, and then he found her family tree. Her maiden name was Beaumont, and her father, Alaric's father-in-law, his name was Owen Beaumont, a wealthy shipping magnate who had bankrolled Alaric's early ventures, who had died in 1944. The truth hit them both like a physical blow. The inscription wasn't for Eliza's grandfather. It was a memorial. The ring, Eliza breathed, piecing it together. The ring wasn't for two brothers to share. It was for a father and son, all Alaric Pierce and his son, William, my grandfather. No, Gideon set his eyes wide with the horrifying clarity of the truth. All Alaric didn't have a son named William in 1922. His son William was born in 1925. In 1922, Alaric Pierce had one child, a son born in 1905, his firstborn son. He clicked one last time, and a black and white photograph filled the screen. It was a formal portrait of two young men, both handsome and proud. One was clearly a young Alaric Pierce. The other, the dreamer, the guardian of the soul, was his brother. Underneath the photograph was the caption, Alaric and Daniel Pierce, 1921. And beneath that, in the official genealogical record, was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. The entry for Daniel Pierce listed his full name, Daniel Owen Pierce. Daniel was the Owen the ring was inscribed for. It wasn't a memorial to his father-in-law. He was reclaiming his middle name, the only part of his identity his brother couldn't take from him. The twist was so profound, so complete that the room fell silent. The entire family history was a lie. Daniel wasn't the younger brother. Based on his birth year, he was the older brother. He should have been the heir. Alaric was the younger son, the builder. And William Pierce, Gideon's grandfather, wasn't Alaric's only son. He was the second son. Daniel was Alaric's firstborn. No, wait. Gideon looked at the birth dates again. Daniel, born 1905. William, born 1925. That couldn't be right. They weren't brothers. Alaric and Daniel were brothers. But William wasn't Daniel's brother. He was his nephew. The story they'd been chasing was wrong. The players were wrong. Eliza's grandfather hadn't met a random outcast. He had met Daniel Owen Pierce, the true disinherited heir to the Pierce fortune, and Daniel hadn't given him a token of solidarity. He had given him the ring, his own ring, inscribed with his own name for safekeeping. It was a piece of evidence, a dormant claim to an empire. And William Pierce, Gideon's grandfather, hadn't just stolen an invention from Owen Callaway. He had done it to suppress a man who had been in contact with the one person on earth who could challenge his own father's and therefore his own legitimacy, his uncle Daniel Pierce. The note he knows. Found him. Daniel is the key. Snapped into focus. He was Owen Callaway. R was likely Robert's father or grandfather, another part of the conspiracy. And Daniel was the key because his existence and his connection to Callaway threatened to unravel the foundational lie upon which William Pierce's entire life and fortune were built. They hadn't just silenced an inventor. They were silencing a witness. The truth pieced together from the artisan's ledger was more corrupt than they had ever imagined. Daniel Owen Pierce, the rightful heir, had been systematically erased from history. Gideon's grandfather, William, had silenced Owen Callaway, not over a simple invention, but to bury the foundational lie of their family's power. It became terrifyingly clear that Gideon's cousin, Robert, knew this dirty secret and was positioning himself to use it as a weapon in a corporate power play. There was only one place to force a reckoning: the annual Pierce Foundation Charity Gala, Robert's personal stage. For Eliza, her mother's presence was non-negotiable. This fight was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about delivering justice. And for that to happen, the victim's voice had to be heard. The grand ballroom glittered with false brilliance, a perfect setting for the unmasking. Robert was in his element, the charming, benevolent host. That was until he saw Gideon and Eliza cutting a path directly toward him. His practiced smile became a brittle facade. Robert Gideon began his voice low and cold, cutting through the pleasantries. The games are over. We know about Daniel Owen Pierce, the true heir. Robert scoffed, preparing a condescending dismissal. Gideon, you've clearly been listening to fairy tales from a... He was cut off by a woman's voice, weak but amplified by a microphone that sliced through the ballroom's polite chatter. His fairy tale cost my father his life. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the entrance, where Laura Holloway sat in a wheelchair, her gaze locked on Robert with an intensity that defied her frailness. William Pierce destroyed my father because he was friends with the honorable man your family threw away, Laura declared. My father was forced to keep your secret. I will not. As gas rippled through the stunned crowd, the massive screens on stage meant to display photos of the foundation's good works flickered. Eliza held up her phone, and the damning image from the Parisian Ledger filled the screens for all to see. The entry detailing the commission for 2 rings, and the name to be inscribed within the second Owen. Trapped, Robert stared from Laura's accusing face to the irrefutable proof on the screens. He was cornered by a ghost from the past and evidence set in stone. Gideon stepped forward, his voice ringing with chilling authority. "My family's legacy is built on a lie," he announced to the captive audience. "A lie my grandfather silenced a man to protect, and a lie my cousin," he turned, pinning Robert with a glare, "planned to use for his own personal gain." The public accusation pushed Robert over the edge. His carefully constructed composure shattered into pure, unrestrained rage. "You fool, Gideon," he hissed, forgetting the live microphone just inches from his mouth. "I was trying to protect us. I knew the truth, and I kept it buried. You and your pathetic little waitress have ruined everything." The confession, amplified for all to hear, echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. In a single self-incriminating breath, Robert had confirmed a century of corruption and authored his own spectacular downfall. He stood alone, exposed under the glittering chandeliers, the king of a corrupt castle that had just crumbled to dust around him. The aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of headlines and resignations. The Pierce dynasty was shaken, but in the ensuing quiet, it was being reborn, not broken. Weeks later, in a sun-drenched private hospital suite, a fragile peace had settled. Laura Holloway, looking out over a green garden, had a light in her eyes that Eliza hadn't seen in years. The weight of a lifetime of secrets had finally been lifted. Gideon Pierce entered the room quietly, no longer an untouchable tycoon, but a man humbled by the truth. He didn't offer empty apologies. Instead, he placed a leather-bound document on the table beside Laura's bed. "The Daniel Owen Pierce Foundation," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "It will exist to fund the independent inventors and artists my family tried to crush. A significant portion of my family's fortune will serve as its endowment, with the estate of Owen Calloway as its first honorary beneficiary." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. It was more than restitution. It was justice forged into a new legacy. Laura simply reached out and placed her hand over Gideon's. "You have honored him," she whispered. "You have honored them all." Gideon then looked at Eliza, pulling his own phoenix ring from his finger and placing it next to the one that had started it all. The two rings, twin flames of pale gold, lay side by side, finally reunited. "One for the builder, one for the guardian," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "I can rebuild the company, but it has been missing its soul for a century. Help me bring it back, Eliza." It was an offer not of money or power, but of purpose. Looking at the two ring symbols of a promise finally kept Eliza saw a clear path forward. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and her heart full. "Let's give them a legacy to believe in." A single sentence in a late-night diner set in motion a chain of events that rewrote history. Eliza Holloway, a waitress who fought for her mother's honor, proved that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a power that no fortune can suppress. And Gideon Pierce, a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage of lies, discovered that true wealth isn't about what you inherit, but about the integrity you choose to build. Their story reminds us that every family has its secrets, and that it sometimes takes the courage of an outsider to bring the truth to light, allowing the phoenix to finally rise from the ashes. If this story of truth, justice, and the incredible power of one person's voice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story that's more than just fiction. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramas that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Click that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for listening.